interpret something may not be the same way that someone else interprets it. So for me, I would like to, work on this ordinance so that we can try to make it as direct as possible, so we don't have the legal challenges, so we don't have the people challenging the township, and we don't, have people that always have to get, clarification as to, what this means. So I just want to try to be as clear as possible, when we put this together.
And we can, I think we can adjust that 1300.08, I think,
Obviously,
without having to change and
Right.
create two ordinances.
Right. Okay.
I mean, there have been comments, for example, with regard to the footage and whether or not it's an appropriate amount of footage. And again, we spent a lot of time looking at that. And what we're trying to do is create some proportionality with regard to the marijuana. In other words, if there's just one person in a household, they're not going to need as much square footage available as if there's two people in the household who want to grow marijuana. So as was explained, that's why we have a capped amount at 200 maximum, but we're allowing up to that if there's more than one person seeking to grow. We look very carefully at what really is an abundance of material now that relates to growing marijuana. We looked at various articles, all of which you receive copies of or links to, that relate to yields and that speak to the number of yields that indoor grows can produce. We looked at, for example, the number of often what's sometimes referred to as joints or marijuana cigarettes that are produced from quantities of marijuana. And we, for example, one source says that it's not uncommon to get 84 joints out of an ounce of marijuana. We looked at the typical effects from marijuana from smoking it and the duration of those effects. And putting that all together, we tried to come up with what were appropriate square footages based on the expected yields and what we would be looking at in terms of the number of harvests that can occur and the marijuana produced and then consumed. And we tried to err a little bit more to the medical side because for medical purposes, the type of marijuana grown is not going to be as widespread as for recreational purposes. If persons growing are trying to get a particular type of effect for medicinal purposes as opposed to just recreational. So we try to look carefully at all of those different items to come up with what was a proportionality ordinance, something that tried to create proportions that produced enough marijuana to take care of the patient, and then also to take care of the caregiver as well. And if we get additional information received, and if it's adopted and it's not working out, and we see clearly that it needs adjustment, the ordinance obviously could be amended and adjustments made. We're really trying to create a balance here so that we have marijuana that's available for consumption, both as is allowed under the Retail and Taxation Act, which is really a leisure use of marijuana, and also under the original Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, which is, as has been pointed out, a medicinal use. So we've tried to work to see if we can't balance that out, those needs of those persons, again, against the safety aspects. These are residential dwelling units. People are occupying them. And we don't want to see mold problems. We don't want to see fire hazards and fires. And in terms of the illumination, and there was some points made about how, wait a minute, what about the issues of lights at the holiday season and so on? Well, typically, the lights used in marijuana growing tend to be very high wattage lots in terms of output. So the brightness of the lights can be very extensive. And our intent there is to try to just make sure that we're not going to see situations where there's marijuana being grown and there's a bright illumination that's coming through a window and adversely affecting a neighbor. The whole idea here is just to try to make sure that we don't run into problems where people can't get along. And with regard to marijuana smoke and marijuana odor, I think just about everyone who's smelled marijuana, whether it's burned or not, recognizes that there is a relatively strong odor from marijuana. And people do have a right to use marijuana under the law, grow it, and so on. But on the other hand, adjoining properties shouldn't have to suffer from excessive odor and from smoke if that's the and we've already, and I think Bruce can attest to it, I know Barry can, Barry Miller, our building director, who's connected remotely, that we've gotten already a fair number of complaints relating to people either smoking marijuana or having it, in a location so that it can be smelled from a distance away where someone else is trying to enjoy their property. So that's really what we tried to do here. We spent quite a bit of time on it, and but obviously here we're getting comments. I think I would agree that we can make some adjustment on the 1 point raised, because I do think that our intent was not to prohibit anyone who's got a prescription who's a minor from using marijuana.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jack. Mr. Kerr, go ahead.
Madam Chair, sort of a question related to 1300.08. Are we in the business of that limitation as a planning commission? And what I would ask is, let's talk about Randazzo's for a second. They came before us. They said, hey, we have a site plan. We'd like to change our site. And as a body, planning commission, we look at our zoning laws and we say, okay, that fits within the right zone. It's the right type. It matches. It meets all the rules. Mm-hmm. And then we refer up to the board. Is there anything in the code that would say, hey, Randazzo's, you guys are not allowed to sell alcohol to someone who's under 21? Now, I know that's a law, mm-hmm. but is that something that would need to go into a code or a zoning code that then we planning commissioners, and I hope, I strive to be an expert in being a planning commissioner, but legally, as someone else is responsible for if Randazzo's is going to sell alcohol to a minor, I don't want to say it's not I don't think it falls under the purview of us to write a code that says, oh, by the way, in zoning X and in location Y, you're not allowed to sell alcohol to a minor. That's kind of understood because that's a law kind of outside of us. Sorry. So I could say, even to the point if we took out the allowing for the pediatric piece of it, I wonder if that section belongs at all in the zoning code, because we have state law that regulates who's allowed to be a patient, state law that regulates who's allowed to be a caregiver. Legally, if a caregiver would be breaking the law to give, those laws already exist. I don't know that we need to codify them in our code. That's my thought, and I'd be open for a conversation on that.
It's just